My name's Gary. Feel free to ask me questions. I'm a military veteran, 18 years in the British military, actually. So if you got anything about British aircraft stuff, just ask me. A lot of my stuff is down there, so I know about that. Please ask questions. Otherwise, I just talk. All right. Three museums. One is a World War I hangar, so it's mostly cloth aircraft, so very fragile, so please don't touch those planes at all. We have a control tower that was built by the Royal Air Force in 1940. That's a time capsule, pretty well, of 1940. U.S. took it over in 1942. So to give you an example how the U.S. ran a base as well in Europe. And the final building down there is a German hangar built by the Nazis in the 1930s as a training school, later converted to a factory that built Fokker 190 fighters. And we actually have one of those fighters in there. So it takes about an hour, hour and a half. There is a restroom down there as well, so feel free for that. Pictures, take as many as you like. And like I say, please ask questions. All right, so what we're going to do is get in our cars, drive to the end of the road. When you get to the end, turn left, park. There's plenty of parking. I'll meet you in front of the wooden building right there, and we'll start there. Yeah, all canvas, or Irish linen mostly. Engines are about 100 horsepower if you were lucky. And at top speed, if you're towards the end of the war, about 120 miles an hour on the better ones. Is that a rotor on there? Yes. Most of these are reproductions, except for two aircraft in here, which is the Curtis Jenny and the Thomas More Scout.
Oh, so that's an original Jenny?
Yep.
Oh, that's the one that goes like this, but this one was on the stand. This one?
Yep, one over there, the tan one, the 34135. That's the stamp. Yeah, we have a picture of the stamp as well, so you can see that. I'm just waiting for a few more people who are going to be coming down. Ah, here they are. Perfect. This is a sort of, I love to have a house like this.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just going to wait for the last crowd to come in and then we'll be ready. Restrooms, by the way, are right behind you. All right, we are all here, so let me give you a quick overview. So the building itself is a reproduction of a 1916 Royal Flying Corps hangar. That's pre-Royal Air Force. So this would be wooden, of course, as you can see. It would be moved around the battlefield as needed. This would be mud normally. The front wouldn't be solid doors, it'd be canvas camouflage curtains. So as the battlefield changed forward and back, especially in World War I, this would be disassembled and moved as needed in the field. This is actually 3 times bigger than the ones they would have had at the time. So what you're looking at in here is 1909 to 1909 aircraft. I will tell you most of these are reproductions, except for 2 of them, which are the US aircraft. Most of these planes are British, German, and French. That was the main aircraft in World War I. Now the World War I, which was known as a Great War for the Europeans, we call it World War I, started in August 1914 and finished in, anybody know? November 11th, 1918. Hence when the armistice day is on that day. The 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month. About 20 million people were killed in that war total, just to give you an idea. The US got involved in World War I in 1917 in April. We didn't have an Air Force, so we sort of started from a cold start to get up to speed. Most of the aircraft the US Army Air Corps used at that time were obviously the Allied aircrafts. The one upside down is a SPAD, which is one aircraft. They would use the blue plane underneath as well, which is a Newport, and they will also use the British SE-5, which is over there. Just to give you some ideas. So let me take you to the 2 original aircraft in here, which is over here, which are the US aircraft. So this is a Curtis Jenny. If you were a pilot in the US Army Air Corps at the beginning of the war, this is the plane you learned in. It's a very stable aircraft, easy to learn to fly. 2-seater for obvious reasons. You as a novice pilot would sit in the front, pilot sits at the back. You'll notice a mirror there at the front. That's for me as the pilot to see the expression on your face, like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But it's a reliable aircraft. Now, let's think about it. We're talking 1917. Wright Brothers was 1903, jumping over a sand dune. So in 15 years, we're now flying two-seater aircraft at 100 miles an hour. So we've come a long way. Relatively reliable. It's a V8, water-cooled engine. There is no brakes. That's why you have a long runway. And we have a 5,000-foot-long runway for that same reason. You would learn to fly in this. This whole aircraft is made out of cloth and wood. You'll notice at the bottom of the wings, the hoops, at the very bottom wings at the two ends. You are a new pilot. You jump in a plane and you start trying to take off and you're a little heavy-handed. The wings will do a tendency of this. If you're a little heavy-handed and the wing hits the ground and you're at 70 miles an hour, you cartwheel and die. So the hoop is a way to warn you that your wingtip is hitting the thing, because what you would feel is the stick suddenly shaking like that. And we'll see another plane that it was more critical to have it. The war ends, there's 10,000 of these aircraft left over after the end of the war in November 1918. So they're up for sale. You could buy one of these planes for $50. And then suddenly you're a pilot flying around the country. You fly to a little town in the middle of Iowa and say, who wants to take a plane flight? $5, I'll take you up. Most people had never even flown. So it's a great way to make revenue. You may have seen women standing on wings like this, persuading your girlfriend or your wife to stand on the wing while you do aerobatics. Wing walkers, and also barnstorming, where they crash it into a barn. But if you're only paying $50 for an airplane, it's easy enough to get a new one. Same with the engines. They were mass-produced and they were cheap to buy as well. You could get an engine for $50. Now, somebody mentioned the famous stamp, the Jenny. This aircraft was used for first services of airmail. And so they printed a stamp. They printed one page upside down. So a sheet of these, there's only one sheet of these stamps ever printed. 2 years ago, they sold an individual stamp for $1.9 million. And hence you can see people are thinking, I'm going to pay for my college fees by trying to take this one. So we've learned to fly. Next thing is we got to learn how to be a fighter pilot. No, Air Force didn't exist till 1947. It was the Army.
The military that had never flown.
Well, most of the Air Forces were really arms of the Army at that time. British, German, French, everybody, they were used for observation, not for fighting or bombing at the time. So when the war started, all we were doing on all sides was flying over the enemy lines, looking down, writing notes, flying back and telling our observers what was going on. If you think about the Civil War, they sent up balloons with the same idea to look across. This way I could actually fly over and see what's going on.
We had no guns in them.
Not at all, not initially. So the idea was you're just an observation and better than a balloon. But as we're in 1917 now, the Allies in Europe have been fighting, shooting, starting to bomb, so they had advanced. So the US sort of jumped that step of worrying about observation. So the Thomas More Scout looks like a fighter aircraft and was designed to look and act like one, so you can learn how to fly a fighter. It's a single-seater aircraft, no guns, because it was never going to be used in a dogfight, but it gave you the experience of flying and maneuvering a fighter aircraft. You'll notice also no brakes as well on this one. These two planes are 1917, that's when they were built. This one took 10 years to refurbish, by the way. Now, early engines were rotaries. And what would happen as the propeller's turning around is attached to the engine, the whole engine and the propeller turn together. So as that blade's going around, so is the engine. The reason being is the oil's here, it gets thrown out with centrifugal force and lubricates the engine. And also the turning keeps it cool. Now, we may have seen pictures of old pilots where they wear the scarves over their faces to look dashing. The real reason is the lubricant was castor oil. Castor oil, if we know what it can do to you, it kind of loosens you up a little bit. So you burn a gallon of gas, you're also burning half a gallon of castor oil, which is going into your face. So you don't want to be breathing that. So that's a Thomas Edison. These two, like I say, are original aircraft. So let's go back a little bit in time. Let's go to 1909 and start talking about early World War I as well. To this aircraft over here, which is the Blériot. Oh, not till the 1930s. Because as planes got faster, we started doing that.
Stop the plane, they had to use pulleys and whatever for it?
Drag. Tail dragger. So its friction really just drags it along. And if you look at like there, you'll see it's a tail dragger there as well. So 1909, let's go back to time. 1903, I keep reminding us all about the Wright brothers. In 1909, the Daily Mail newspaper in London issued a challenge. We will pay £1,000, which is about $150,000 today, for the first person to fly across the English Channel. This plane, not this original one, but the pilot, Blériot, designed this aircraft as a single-seater, flew this type of aircraft across the English Channel, which is 20 miles in 36 minutes, and got £1,000. But that also proves something else. We have a plane that can fly a long distance. And he created an aircraft manufacturing company, Blériot, and started selling these as, to the military as spotter planes, two-seaters. Sorry? Oh, it's safe as houses. No cloth here because weight is critical. It's a very weak engine because of that time period. So anything you can take to take weight out gives you more advantage. So if you take cloth out, it's all weight. Paint is weight. If you remember the space shuttle in the early days, you see the big tank on the outside. You see it orange in the later days. The early ones were painted. By taking the paint off the big fuel tank on the space shuttle, it could carry extra cargo because it was weight. So this was mass-produced, sold across Europe as a spotter plane, two-seaters. In North America, when you came in the main lobby, you saw that little string bag there, the Vin Fizz. That was sponsored by Armour Foods, who actually was making a drink called the Vin Fizz, which was a grape soda. The pilot of that plane, unfortunately, flew from the East Coast to the West Coast, won an award, a prize cash money award, was killed in a plane crash shortly after. First woman's pilot with a license in North America is this lady. And as you can see, Harriet Quimby. She was the first licensed female pilot. She took over from the pilot of the Vin Fizz and wore an orange, guess what color suit? Purple. Yeah, so she did. She was also famous for something else. She was the first woman to fly from England to France on an airplane, one of these. So she would do air shows in North America, flying around. I'll put it back up here so I don't lose it. And she was at Boston doing an air show. Lost control, the plane started oscillating. Passenger in the back was cast out of the aircraft while she's in the air. She did a loop. She also fell out of the aircraft as well and was killed. 1912. Reason being is no seat belts at that time. Never made the front page of the newspapers because it happened the same day as the Titanic loss was announced. So that's what happened. But seat belts, we all assume, we take it for a, it's a given nowadays, fasten your seat belts before you take off. They didn't think about that. And you'll see some of these planes, see the Vin Fizz in the lobby, has no seat belts. In fact, they didn't even know this plane could do a loop-the-loop until they saw it in the accident. And that's when they realized.
Is that how you control where it goes?
Oh no, that's your tail dragger. That's, when you look on the tail there, that's what's going to slow you down when you land. So World War I starts. The British and the French have about 150 aircraft each, spotter planes. We fly over the enemy lines, take look at what they're doing, write notes, drop it down. Germans are doing the same to the English. So what happens? We decide to start taking pot shots at each other. So we go up with a pistol or a rifle, and I'm flying with the left hand, and I'm shooting right hand, and I'm shooting with the left hand. I'm going like this. First plane that was ever shot down was by a French pilot and his gunner, who were in what they call a pusher aircraft, which is where the propeller is behind the aircraft, not at the front. That was in 1914. He had a machine gun, in fact, and shot down a German Paracel, which is a single-winged aircraft. Not much different looking than this plane. So they started shooting at each other then. The only disadvantage of having a rear gunner or a pusher plane is you get a lot of weight, people are moving around. You'd rather be looking at the plane when you shoot it, like modern fighters. So gosh, the Germans came up with the Eindecker, which is this plane behind you here. This is the first fighter that could shoot through a propeller. Single engine, single wing. Eindecker means single wing. With a 60-round machine gun on the front, 60 bullets. And now suddenly, instead of me depending on a person sitting in front of me shooting, I'm actually being able to aim the aircraft and shoot it down. Germans were told, the pilots were told, do not fly over the Allied lines because if you crash, they'll learn how we did this secret. As you can imagine, if you were shooting the gun all the time, wouldn't I chop the propeller off? So what they have is a cam inside. So when the propeller blade lines with the gun, the cam is coming up, turns the gun off. Blade goes by, starts shooting again. This is the same gun you see in the movies where they use like trenches. So it's a pretty heavy gun, actually.
The Germans were the innovators
Of the first plane to shoot through the propellers, yeah. The British and the French had like a plane, the DH-1. I can't remember what the French one's called off the top of my head, but you would have a gunner in the front, the pilot would sit behind and the engine's behind him, then you didn't have a propeller to worry about. So the Eindecker was quite an effective fighter, but they crashed behind enemy lines. We got the idea how they did it. Then everybody starts adding machine guns. Yeah, welcome to World War I. We do a pretty good job of killing each other. So I'll move to a little side. So the first aircraft to land on a flat deck on a ship is the plane right behind you. So 1910 was effectively the first carrier landing, if you want to think about that. This plane, by the way, still flies. This is what it looked like in 1910. This is him actually taking off on a cruiser that had a flat top put on it with wooden decks. And you can see he's just taking off. He hit the water, landed on the land here in Norfolk, actually Virginia. Navy was impressed and said, let's see you land. So this is in San Diego. They put sea bags on the side for weight and ropes. We've all heard the term tail hook. You look at the back there, there's his tail hook. So that's what he would catch it with. His total flying career was 18 months start to finish. And he was killed in a crash as well. Huh? After this, he was doing the thing and the plane collapsed around him. So people ask us, do your planes really fly? This one is this one here. And if you look at this building here, it's the one you're standing in right now. And the escort plane is that green plane far over there. So the original one was made of, as you can see, bamboo. This is a modern reproduction, of course. Bamboo, wire, no instruments, no seat belt. And this one actually has a radio, has controls. It has a more modern engine. The black is the fuel tank, of course.
Never go in that. That's crazy.
It was the first plane to land on a cruiser?
Yeah, on a flat ship.
So what was the ship used before then?
That was a cruiser. They just basically put a wooden deck on top. If you look at some of the
giant wooden deck and just said go for it.
Yeah.
I see.
Real carriers didn't come out till about the 1930s. Okay. But they were proof of concept. When you came into the lobby and you saw the upside down plane, that's a British Sopwith Pup. That was the first British plane to land on a moving warship. So the pilot is right here. A couple of things to notice on the pilot. He's wearing a football helmet, leather. And he also couldn't swim. So if you can't swim, you put a life jacket on, right? So he put on bicycle inner tubes. That's what he's got around his body there.
Would they, if it was like windy or something, they wouldn't take off, or did they not?
What?
I mean, there's.
Yeah, no, I mean, you think about it. They didn't actually have any fear in those days. The Vin Fizz you saw in the lobby, the pilot got 90 minutes training before he actually took off. So I don't know about you, but me driving a car took longer than 90 minutes to learn how to fly. All right, so why don't we move around here a little bit? You also have to think about speed. I mean, this aircraft maximum speed is 50 miles an hour. So, I mean, you're not, still, if you drop out of the sky at 100 miles an hour, you're still going to hurt, yeah.
I'm guessing there's no seatbelt on this either?
Nope, this one does, of course, but the original's
Just
one.
like a guy just made this, or like a company made it?
Oh, Curtis is the manufacturer of it originally. So, if you're familiar with World War I aircraft, we all know about the Fokker triplane, the Red Baron, Snoopy and the Red Baron. We have 3 of them, but I'll show you the aircraft itself. So the Red Baron, he was known mostly because he shot down 80 aircraft. couple of interesting things about him. He didn't start flying until 1916. Before that, he was a cavalry officer, a lancer with the Uhlans. So qualifications for the Royal Flying Corps to be a pilot, a lot of times they would ask you, can you ride a horse? If you can ride a horse, you're in pretty good shape to become a pilot. The Royal Flying Corps also, fatalities in training was 50%. So if there are 30 of you in a class, 15 of you might not be there when they graduated. Your average lifespan as a British fighter pilot in World War I was 7 days. So when you think about it, it's like, hey, you got a dashing, good-looking uniform, that's why. But you think about the time, 1914, 15, you're taking off in a canvas aircraft with a somewhat unreliable engine, surrounded with gasoline and fabric. You take off in the weather in Europe, it's raining, it's thundering, you don't know what the weather conditions are, so you're going to fight against the weather. You don't know the structural state of the aircraft all the time because it could be cracked wood rims, could have holes in it from whatever. You get up above the cloud level and then you got a German with a machine gun trying to shoot you, plus anti-aircraft. You get bullets through here, damages a rib or something, you take a sharp turn and a wing drops off. You survived all that and then you fly back through the weather, through the thing, and you're landing on a field somewhere in France or Belgium with no brakes and hoping that you don't suddenly stop and bend over. And away you go the next day. So let's go back to the Fokker triplane. Fokker triplane, why 3 wings? 3 wings gives you much more maneuverability. So you're in a dogfight, you can turn tighter. The flip side is there's a lot more drag, so you're slower. But if you're flying in a dogfight, this is the plane you want to have because you got the maneuverability. The Germans didn't invent the triplane. It was actually the British. This is a Sopwith triplane. One thing I want you to notice is where the wings are. This is the bottom wing. This is the bottom wing here. You'll notice it's lower, and I'll talk about why that's important in a second. Sopwith brought this out. The Navy were going to get them, the Air Force was going to get them first. They said, no, we're getting SPADs. So the Navy said, no, you're not. We're getting the SPADs. And then the Air Force said, no, we want them. You can have these Sopwiths. So the Royal Navy ended up with these, and also the Canadians. The Canadians made a squadron called the Black Marias. They painted the nose black. Each one had a different name, Black Maria, Black Death. They would write it underneath, and they took off. In 1 month, they shot down 90 German aircraft, 1 Canadian squadron. At that point, the Germans said, we want one of those planes. So again, do not cross the enemy lines, because if you crash, we'll find you. British planes crashed, Fokker looked at them, and he designed this aircraft. Why did I mention the wings? You're a novice pilot. Remember the plane over there, the Curtiss? Remember the hoops? If you're taking off and you're a little heavy-handed, your wingtip hits the ground, you crash. So the Germans put axe handles on the bottom of the wing, so the axe handle would touch the ground and vibrate through the stick. You didn't have the problem with the Sopwith. So why didn't the British keep making Sopwith triplanes? Well, to change the oil in the engine, you had to take the whole plane apart. And you can't really do that too well in one of these hangars on the front line. So it was a maintenance nightmare. And anyway, the famous Sopwith Camel was coming out, and everybody said, we'll wait for a Camel. So they only made about 150 of these total. Germans made about 100 of these. The Aces flew these because if you're a good pilot, you can handle the maneuverability. And the Red Baron flew this, and there's a couple of others. Werner Voss, there's a triplane over there. He was a contemporary of the Red Baron. He used to paint a face on the front of his aircraft. But triplanes are not great if you got new pilots. You don't get a lot of training, a lot of experience. You're going to crash it, especially when you're landing or when you're taking off. 2 machine guns now. The Sopwith only had 1, so it was somewhat underarmed at that time period as well.
Why is it like scalp?
That's the way the Germans did it. There's no air, basically when they lay the canvas, or the cloth I should say, on there, they dope it. The ribs are here, the British will put a strip across. The Germans didn't do that. So it pulls it up like that. Adds absolutely no aerodynamic advantage at all. Just the uniqueness of a German. Now, coloring, you can see the nice flashy pink there. You can see the red one over there. Yellow noses. The Germans believed in coloring their aircraft. I'm an ace. I can do whatever the heck I like. But if I'm in the air and I'm looking over in the distance and I see another plane, is that a Sopwith triplane or is it a Fokker triplane? But if I have a colored nose or something, I can tell it's my squadron. In World War II, the Germans used the same sort of color ideas as well. So you're in a dogfight or you see planes from a distance, there's a quick way to identify it from a distance. But if you're an ace, you can paint the plane any color you like. Like I said earlier, the disadvantages is drag because of paint and also weight. So you lose a little bit in speed.
What if they copied the colors of the other plane?
That would be against the law, against the rules of war. Why we also put emblems on the side. The Germans had that. British had what they call a roundel, which looks like a target. So World War II is progressing. We're familiar about, World War I. As World War I progresses, we know about people going over the top in the trenches. You climb up, they get caught in the wire, get massive machine guns. So the Germans started changing the strategy. They went to stormtroopers, small platoons of soldiers attacking, not a wave attack, so there's less chance of killing them all in a wave. The Germans then perfected an aircraft to be able to shoot up trenches. You're in a trench, it's about 10 feet tall, bullets go over the top, shrapnel flies over, you're pretty safe. Until somebody comes along in a plane like this, flies over your trench, and turns his machine gun down and starts shooting along the trench. So the Germans would attack with gas, they would attack with artillery, small fighting groups, and these planes would come along and drop grenades, light bombs into the trench. And that's what that particular aircraft's designed for.
Second person that's shooting?
Huh? Yeah, second person's at the back there doing that. Aiming downwards and dropping grenades just to make your day.
Traffic from the trenches then, that's crazy.
Yeah, so not so good. All right. What else? So why don't we spend a few minutes walking around? Any questions you've got, please feel free to ask me. And just remember, you're in a canvas airplane with gasoline and bullets around you. And
Canvas, you mean like this is metal and then
this is cloth. This is cloth.
Looks like metal.
No, the only metal is on the engine cowling because of the heat. But everything else is fabric.
Is it like nowadays it's not cloth, right?
Nowadays we use Kevlar. But in those days it was just pure cloth. Irish linen was the preferred one the British used. You put a fabric chemical on it called dope, which tightens this up and makes it waterproof.
And why are those made of wood? Isn't it the propeller
This?
parts?
Oh, this is a strut. It keeps the wing from flexing up and down. And it ties into the frame. Huh?
Isn't wood really heavy?
Not as heavy as this metal is. We didn't really have the skills to work aluminum like we do now, of course.
What's the reason of this?
That's just so we can visually see the control surfaces. So if he has a frayed cable or a stretch cable,
Okay.
you can visually see it quickly. This would not have been on the original aircraft.
What is this thing?
I'm sorry? It's German.
Google Translate says it's the cat.
The
whining,
cat whiners in India.
And then that's the breaker.
Yeah. But basically, it was a cartoon
Is it
series.
Norwegian?
No, it's German originally. The language is German.
Oh, well, Google Translate's not.
It's not? It doesn't say? It says it's Dutch?
Norwegian.
That's
Norwegian. That's German. Norway was part of Sweden during World War I.
The fuel in the
This is your fire pump.
fire pump.
what does that mean?
Well, you crash, you're on fire.
Oh, like
So we towed this out. I put water in there, and away I go. It's a stirrup pump.
it's so
And
bad.
you're standing there with a hose trying to put him out. You know.
Such a horrible
Oh, no parachutes either.
Oh my god.
Yeah, you weren't allowed. The Royal Flying Corps would not let you have parachutes because it was a sign of cowardice. So if you bailed out of a burning aircraft, you were losing your fighting spirit.
I just think of like you birth your child and you do all these things and care for them, and then you plop them in the
Yeah, well.
7-day life to live, and then goodbye.
Well, it's regretfully that's war. It's not something that we should ever take lightly. Submarine service in World War II had the highest losses. German, British, and US, they lost more than anybody. Then the bomber fleets were second. 50% fatalities.
They had glass, the whole front was just made of glass. U-boats? There's torpedoes, I guess. There's
Depth charges,
depth charges, yeah.
Hedgehog, ramming. 50% of submarines were sunk by ramming.
You have sunk a ton of like potatoes.
Oh, yeah.
and things, right?
Get an attractive plane. Go over by the colorful one. This is a British green one. It's kind of boring. So this is a Zeppelin ladder. So if you look over here, you can see an airship. You know, like the Hindenburg?
Yeah, we were looking at that. We were trying to figure out how tall the ladder could get.
Oh, about 20 feet.
Oh, okay.
You ever see, well, obviously you've seen the Empire State Building, correct? You know, the pin at the top was actually designed for airships to tie into. And then you would climb down across a gangway from the top of the Empire State Building from your airship nose into there, and it's a spiral staircase down into the Empire State Building. I don't know about you, but if I get on a 20-foot ladder, my knees go a little bit.
Yeah.
Top of the Empire State Building, nah. But that gives you an idea of height here.
Right.
I mean, this is the nose, but actually the accommodation's at the bottom. So they would just lean it up against there. And this is more for like, you wouldn't have civilian passengers coming down something like this.
Right,
This is more like the staff and things like the workers. But this was actually in Akron, Ohio, which is where the US used to have all their airships.
Okay.
You know, as a Goodyear tire company.
Uh-huh.
There it is. All right, why don't we move along then?
It sounds so stupid, but I guess why would you think of a seatbelt if you never knew?
All right, why don't I talk about these planes outside first, and then give you an idea, and also about the hangar. So two things. The hangar is original except for the outer skin and the roof. This was built, like I say, by the Nazis in the late 30s, 1938. We acquired it in Eastern Germany after the wall fell, brought it back over here and reassembled it. So the aircraft outside, 1944, the British and the US is bombing the heck out of Germany. 1,000 bomber raids are not unusual. Germany is desperate for medium-sized fighter aircraft. So they started an internal competition to design next-generation fighter aircraft. This is what you're looking at. None of these actually made it to final production. These are actually models. We have a couple out here because they're going to be rebuilt. They are made of plywood. And the reason being is aluminium, whatever you want to call it, was in short supply. The Germans were so desperate for aircraft aluminum that when Mustangs would fly over and drop the fuel tanks, the drop tanks, they would salvage it for scrap. So the US, in its wisdom, started making them out of paper, cellulose.
Yeah.
So they couldn't use it for scrap. So the aircraft you're looking at here, the Delta Wing one, this one actually was proven in a wind tunnel here in Langley, Virginia by NASA, could actually fly. You'll notice none of them have landing gear. They were towed up into the air or carried up in a bomber and released to attack a bomber fleet. This particular one has an ejector seat, which is very, very unique. It also flew on coal dust. Not fuel made from coal, but coal dust. And it would be like a pulse of dust that would ignite and then give it the thrust. Two 30mm cannons, it would be released from a bomber, it would fly into the bomber fleets, allied bomber fleets, shoot them with the cannons, and then glide back to the base and land on the skid, be refueled, rearmed, and towed up again. The plane behind you was designed to run on pulse jets. You saw the V1 in the lobby? It's not a good design for an airplane because you got to get them in sequence. So it would shake itself apart. But in theory, again, towed up in the air by a bomber or a fighter aircraft, launched into a bomber fleet, would attack it with rockets, and then once it's finished its mission, come back and land on a skid. Refueled, rearmed, and away it went. Sorry?
So it lands on a skid?
Skid? Ski underneath. No wheels. So when we go in, you'll see some more on the ceiling as well. I'll talk about those a little bit. I can't, yeah, as you can imagine, persuading the pilot to fly the concept aircraft, either a pulse jet carried up in by another aircraft. That's a jet engine there. The far one over there was known as the Flying Bazooka. It was be towed up behind a fighter, be launched into a fighter's group. Has 2 rockets under the wing. It's a solid rocket engine. It would fly into the bomber fleets, fire 2 rockets, and then it was told to chop the tail off an enemy bomber with its wing, and then you bail out. Then you bail out, yeah. But none of these made it to final production. But this is how desperate they were getting. So we can see the building itself, easy to move around girders. The doors are original as well. This was maintained and built by slave labor. And in fact, this particular hangar has a signature in the far corner of a Polish forced laborer who wrote his name on a welding stick, so he would never be forgotten.
Did you get in trouble?
Luckily for him, well, he would have got shot. But luckily for him, the Russians overran the base before they found it.
What was the ground just, what was on the earth?
I'm sorry?
Like what was the ground? It was just the earth?
Yeah, usually it would be earth at that time. If it was moving around the battlefield, they put concrete pads down and anchor it that way. This particular one actually never moved around. It was built in Cottbus, which is southwest of Berlin. This is how it looked when we finally got our hands on it. And disassembled it, brought it over, reassembled. But this is pictures of it when it was during the war, of course. So you watch movies, and we watch the bomber fleets going over, like Masters of the Air or 12 O'Clock High, and you got the anti-aircraft going off. This is a German 88 anti-aircraft gun. This is an anti-aircraft shell, 88 millimeter. Weighs 66 pounds. So pretty good, pretty beefy. I knew all that. Have my Wheaties. Actually, this is wood, but the cartridge is original. It was a proximity fuse. It'd be set at altitude, go up and explode at the right altitude where the bomber fleet are. 50% of Allied bombers were brought down by this gun, these particular guns. Germans had over 11,500 of these guns in just Europe. You can see this particular plane shot down 17 aircraft. Rings on the barrel there. It's a system, meaning has its own generator, has its own gun, has its own floodlights. So when the British bombed at night, you would look with it was floodlights, spotlights. On the far wall over there, you'll see a black tube. That is the sight for this particular gun system. So what they would do is the bomber fleet would be flying over. I would look up in my sight and I would see 2 images of a B-17. I'd overlap them, and then a calculator, the computer, which is mechanical on the front of that, behind the yellow label, would calculate the speed, altitude, and direction the aircraft were going within 15 minutes. I would then program these and then start throwing up a cloud of anti-aircraft. So I knew accurately where the bombers were. So whenever you see a picture of a B-17 with a big hole in it, that's anti-aircraft. This is shrapnel. It's like an artillery shell. The famous German Tiger tank and Panther tank used an 88 gun as well. This is an anti-tank shell. So when you see the movie Fury, if anybody has seen that, the Tiger tank's there, and they're like, oh my God, it's a Tiger. That's what it was shooting at you at a very long range. It's a very effective gun. This one still works. And we actually take it out for reenacting and shoot blanks, of course, not real shells. Otherwise, you know, we have a few FA-18s not too happy. So the war in Europe, Great War, finishes 1918. The Versailles Treaty is signed, and the Germans are banned from having an air force. So how do you get around that? So the Germans start rearming secretly and training pilots. They train them as glider pilots. We'll see a glider over there in a second. You then want to learn how to fly bombers and transport planes. So you start an airline, Lufthansa. This is a Junkers 52. This was a Lufthansa. This was also later on used as a bomber and a paratrooper plane. Most people don't know the Germans had paratroopers and actually did parachute drops. We all see Band of Brothers, US paratroopers and British. We never hear about the Germans. So they actually did airdrops out of this type of aircraft. It's 3 engines, it's corrugated, and everybody says, why is that? Aluminum wasn't that strong at that time, so to build strength into it, you do corrugations. That makes it stronger. This is the only one flying in North America. Actually, it's made in Spain originally because the Spanish made them under license. So this was actually a Spanish version of it. So we know how now to fly bombers. How do we teach our fighter pilots how to fly? Aerobatics. This is a German aerobatic aircraft. Every 2 years there was a world aerobatic competition in the 1930s. In 1936, during the Olympics, there was an aerobatic contest in Germany, and they got the gold medal. Not part of the Olympics, but part of the global aerobatics competition. And that's the airplane they would learn in. So now I'm learning how to be a fighter pilot, because I know how to fly around. This plane is not German. It's actually a US plane. And this is, we bought this because the logbook says Amelia Earhart flew this plane. But more importantly, Tom Selleck flew in this plane in the Magnum PI TV series.
Okay.
But this is actually the plane he flew in that. But we bought it because of Amelia Earhart. Has it in a logbook that she flew this. We have it here because we don't have enough room in all our other hangars. So it's a little bit of an oddball for here. There's your sight there, as you can see. You can look through the lenses up there. That's what they would look at the bombers. Here's where the computer would be. It's a mechanical computer. It's not electronics. And the gliders, the original German gliders are here. And that's the wings. And here's the body. It's a single-seater. And as you can see, it's kind of cozy. But that's how you start learning how to be a pilot when you're not allowed to have an Air Force. Oh, it's not bad. I learned to fly in one of these. Not that exact one. He could. So moving on, excuse me. We have the weld signature of the Polish Labor Force. Gentlemen, right here. It's up there. You can just see it on the edge of the mirror, but that's what the plaque actually says. It's right in the far corner of the mirror up there. It's not too clear to see, but the actual, what he welded is right there. Obviously, if he got caught, he would have been shot. You can just about see it, but it's easier to see it that way. So moving away from the architecture of the, this is all metal in here. Everything in here is metal except for the white plane there and the green one at the moment. And we have another canvas one over there for you in a second.
Aluminum, like a newly man-made thing then?
No, it's just a strength and being able to work it actually was a hard thing. Who? Polish guy? No, he survived the war. Russians overran the base while he was still working there, and he was released. He died like 1990s. So he did pretty good. Well, we never were able to catch up with him in time, but you'd be surprised how many Polish people come here and want to see this. So the plane you're standing by here is a Messerschmitt 108. If you've ever watched the movie The Great Escape, there's a scene, James Gardner in there escaping in an airplane in the Great Escape movie. It's one of these. So it's a Typhoon. This held the world speed record from Berlin to Istanbul. I never knew there was a race, but anyway. But it's a way to test aircraft concepts. If you look at the back of the plane, very similar to a Messerschmitt 109 fighter. We have a 109 in the Air Force hangar. When you go back, have a look. It's also a good way to start practicing how to fly a fighter aircraft. Mostly used in the war for like transporting officers and such like. So we'll move along. It's
Like Germany wasn't allowed to fly?
not allowed. The Versailles Treaty said no big battleships and no Air Force. So they had to kind of sneak around the rules. Like pocket battleships came out, which like the Bismarck.
They wanted to give up.
Yeah. So you've seen the Stearman in the other hangar. This is the German equivalent. It's canvas. This one's cloth. This is your basic trainer for the Luftwaffe. If you're a Luftwaffe pilot in World War II, this is what you learned in. This is a Fokker Wolf. Now the question comes up sometimes, I know Fokker from World War I. Where does Wolf come from? Well, the silver plane in the hangar we saw back there, the Albatross went bankrupt in 1920. And Fokker bought them, combined the company and produced Fokker Wolf. The most famous Focke-Wulf aircraft will be in the far corner over there in a second. So this is your basic trainer. Now let's get to the Junkers 52. This plane was obsolete by 1939, but the Germans kept it for the whole war. It's a good utility aircraft. It's painfully slow, but it has a good short takeoff and landing. It has 3 engines fixed on the carriage, so that's why it's a slow aircraft. It's pretty old. So we have, as you can see on the 2 yellow cowlings, you see like a porthole or a mirror. It's actually a mirror up there. So it's 3 engines. So when I start this aircraft, I have to make sure all the engines are in sequence. If they're not in sequence, then the aircraft will shake violently. So the mirrors is how I do it. So I start the first engine. It's running. I then start either the left or right engine, my preference. I'll start that one. As I start it, I've got to get that one in sequence with the other engine. And the way I do it is I'm watching this propeller on that mirror and modifying the speed of that engine with the throttles. Once I got the 2 going together, I then start the other engine and do the same thing on that side. So now, every time I start it up. And you think it's terrible when you get on a 737, they say, we're going to start the left engine. It's like, oh, can I have more ice in my Coke, right? Yeah, we get spoiled. The Germans did 2 airdrops in World War II, effectively. First one was on the Maginot Line in 1940, which is the French protection line. They took that with paratroopers. The other big drop and final drop they did was on the island of Crete. Crete is an island just south of the Greek Isles. 750 of these aircraft flew to drop them on the island of Crete. Unfortunately for them, the Australians and the New Zealanders, the British were waiting for them, and they shot down 50% of the aircraft. That was the last. They did take the island, but that was the last parachute drop. The most famous thing probably the German paratroopers did after that was the defense of Monte Cassino in Italy against the Allies. So when we see Band of Brothers, you have to also remember the Germans and the Russians also had paratroopers. So I'll move over to this plane. This is a Messerschmitt 208, a later version of what you've seen over there. You'll notice it's a front wheel as well. This was built in France under occupation by the Nazis. But the reason I talk about this plane is the nose cone. It's a spiral. So why do we have a spiral nose cone? Is it there to hypnotize the enemy pilots as they come at you? Anybody flown on a large jet aircraft recently and looked at the turbine and has a spiral inside on the turbine nose cones as well? If you ever look, next time you're flying, have a look on a jet engine, and you'll see a spiral on the engine as well. It's not to scare birds, it's to stop you walking into the blade. So if I have 20 or 30 fighters in a field, which was common in World War II, and all the engines are running on the aircraft, and some are not running and some aren't, how do I know the propeller's going around? Because of all the engine noise. I mean, if this was running on its own, I could hear it and think about it. 20, 30 aircraft, I don't know. So I'm walking around, I get hit by a propeller because I don't know it's moving. The spiral's doing this, and it says, I am moving, don't walk near me. It's a safety feature. If you look at the plane in front of us, with the yellow tips, if you look at a propeller aircraft with yellow tips, it has a yellow ring going around like that. It's a solid ring. That's how you know the propeller's that way. But the spirals are kind of a smart thing to do. Yeah. So special credit question coming up next. Extra credit, I should say. All right, so what is this? This is extra credit. Something like this. Carries the thingies. Good. That's pretty close. You get half credit. Good answer. Wrong. And you know what? 90% of people say the same thing because they see this and say it must be a rocket launcher, right?
Carries oil.
Ooh, getting close, but no. It is actually a German kitchen. This is a German field kitchen. Here's where you cook all the stew. This actually folds up. That's your chimney stack.
What does it do?
It's a chimney. So the heat goes up and through that. So this is where this is your field kitchen.
Cool. So they fuel it by...
Yeah, it's natural gas and propane in this particular case. Yeah. And it would be filled with water, and basically it's a boiler. Nothing better than warm food.
Sanitary?
Hey, you're in the field. Anything that's warm,
No,
we'll eat it.
Exactly.
If I was the enemy, I'd just like steal this.
Oh yeah. This is actually, if you take the paint off, this is brass on the top, so it's actually, you can polish it up. We acquired this in Israel. Came with one of the aircraft. All right. I guess nobody's going to get extra credit today.
No.
But your guess is about what 90% of people say about it. So this plane is very famous. A couple of things on, this is German. It's a Fischler Storch, which means stork. Fischler designed the V1 rocket you see in the lobby. One unique thing about German aircraft is, you may not notice until I told you, is the engines are upside down. As you can see here. So the question is, why would I do that? All right, I'm a mechanic. I'm actually a marine engineer by trade. And if I have to work on this plane, I need gantry to get up on the top to work on spark plugs. If I turn the engine upside down, I drop it, I can get at everything very easy. If you look at our measurement 109, the bottom panel drops out as well. It's a forced loop system, so it's not like, oh, this engine's going to run out of oil. That's a unique thing about Germans. They thought ahead. High undercarriage. This aircraft is fabric. It is a very short takeoff landing spotter plane. The wings are off on because we're painting at the moment, but very similar wing design as the Junkers 52. This plane is famous for rescuing Mussolini. Mussolini was captured by Italians as the war was coming towards the end. They took him up to a chateau in the top of the Italian Alps. There was no easy access to it. The Germans sent commando raid up there, landed in gliders, and rescued him. If we've seen Mussolini, he's not a skinny guy. Him, the pilot, and the head of the commando group got in this plane and took off on the length of a tennis court.
Oh my God.
It's incredible short takeoff and landing. You rev the engine up, the tail comes up, and then you take off. So very good for that. It's almost like a helicopter as far as short takeoff and landing goes. Germans would use it for spotting, getting into the field, high off the ground, so you got the clearance as well for long grass or whatever, and rough surfaces. And of course, this aircraft still flies. We're changing the color from dark green to actually camouflage. That's why it's, the wings are missing. Of course. And two things to show you here. One, on the back girder there, we've highlighted bullet holes from where the Russians overran the base. This particular plane is a Focke-Wulf 190, better known as a Bloody Bird. You ever watch war movies with B-17s being attacked by single-engine fighter aircraft? It's one of these, or it is a Messerschmitt 109. This plane was a bit of a nightmare when it came out in 1941. Our Spitfire, which you see in the main hangar, is a Mark 9, had to be upgraded to compete against this. It had to have cannons, and it had to have a much more powerful engine. This aircraft is fast, it's maneuverable, it's heavily armed, 4 cannons and another one in the nose and 2 machine guns on the top. That's a lot of firepower. The cockpit is armored, so bullets don't kill the pilot. The engine is a radial, not a water-cooled, so it could take damage. So it could take damage, the pilot can survive, and it can take down B-17s. 3 20-millimeter cannon shells was enough to bring down a B-17. They're not bullets, they're actually like little grenades going off inside the aircraft. This particular one was pulled out of a fjord in Norway. It was shot down, and this is the condition. It was been touched up a little bit. It will go off and get rebuilt. Now, towards the end of the war, this factory was converted to build these aircraft. Because the Allies were bombing the main factories, they couldn't keep them all in one main factory, so they dispersed it all. And this hangar was building these aircraft. Not this particular one, but these type of aircraft. But it's 1944, 45. This came out in 1941. The war started in 39 to 45, of course. So Mustangs would go up in the air and fight up against these. The advantage for us is the average US pilot in 1940s had 200 hours of flying experience, if not more. These guys were getting 14 hours. So you can imagine.
Why would they not?
Oh, they were desperate for fighter pilots. 4 out of 5 German pilots were killed on the Eastern Front fighting against the Russians, not against the British and the Americans. So they were running out of pilots. We were bombing them, of course, and their casualty rates were high. But experience is one big thing. So, and you think an average U.S. bomber after 1943, the U.S. changed their bombing strategy from strategic bombing to actually destroying fighter pilots. So they would send out 1,000 bombers to Berlin with the whole idea of bringing up the German fighter squadrons, and they would have 1,000 Mustangs with them escorting. But the whole idea is we want to take out the fighter pilots, because when D-Day comes, we don't want German aircraft over the beach. So another little piece of trivia is if you look at planes at D-Day, you will notice they have black and white stripes on the wings. Both transport planes, so if you ever watch Band of Brothers and you see the transport planes, they have black and white stripes. The fighter aircraft had the same. It was all done for D-Day, so when we got 10,000 aircraft over the beaches on D-Day, which we did, and you've got a massive airplanes, and you're like, which one's ours, which one's theirs? You're not spending your time trying to find a little swastika on the side, but you see a big black and white stripe, that's pretty obvious. It's ours, not them. If it don't have black and white stripes, you shoot it down. Same with the ships as well. They're seeing a very obvious black and white stripe. So you don't get friendly fire. The Germans managed to put 2 fighters over the beach in D-Day. 2. That's all they could get there. And the reason being is they dispersed them so much, they just didn't get enough aircraft there. So we had air domination on D-Day, which was critical for the landings. So that's your Focke-Wulf. There's one in the main hangar, in the Air Force hangar, you can see. This one here, and we have a D, which is a D version, which is the different engine for higher altitude. That's being rebuilt in Germany right now because the US had B-29s and the Germans thought we were going to bring them over to Europe. We never did, but they needed a fighter to get high enough to go after B-29s. Final plane is a Fiat. This is a fighter trainer. So if you want to learn how to fly a fighter plane in the Italian Air Force, this is what you would have learned to fly in. Built by Fiat, engine by Alfa Romeo. Can't think of anything better combination for reliability. And actually, we're selling this plane, to be honest with you, but that's another story. All right, any questions? Anybody wants to take pictures? No? So the building is what the British call a watchtower. It's a control tower. It's not precast concrete, it's actually brick. You'll see that on the inside. We acquired this, I think it was 2005. Took it apart from the field it was originally in. Brick by brick, reassembled it over here. It's basically a time capsule from 1940. There's 3 levels. Top floor is where the weather people will be, and they'll set off balloons and take wind speed and such like. We can't let you up there, I'm afraid, because it doesn't meet OSHA standards, of course. The mid-level is where the control room is. That's where all the operations. So if you ever see the movie 12 O'Clock High, Memphis Belle, Band of Brothers, also the latest one, Masters of the Air, you'll see them in a control room just like that. There's 4 of these buildings left in the world. This is the only one in North America. So you get to see what this is like. The black building is a Nissen hut. We call them Quonset huts here. So when you see the movies and say, this is the mission for today, and they bring back the curtain, there's the bombing routes, that's the briefing room, that's where you would live, that's where you would sleep, that's where you eat. It is miserable. Summer is there's no insulation. So in summer it's like a hot box, and in winter it's cold as the bejabbers. That is an original British one. It's off the ground so the rats can't come inside, but as you can imagine, it gets cold. One thing I will show you as we go by, we have one of our latest aircraft we've acquired, and I'll talk about that when we get there.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So that is a Curtiss Commando. It's a paratrooper slash transport aircraft. We're familiar with the DC-3, Dakota, Skytrain, which we see where paratroopers drop out, same concept aircraft, but this is made by Curtiss. It had 2 doors, not 1, so it was better for paratroopers. This particular one's history was it flew over the Himalayas. Why? We were supplying the Chinese army fighting the Japanese in World War II, so supplies would come out of India, over the Himalayas, and land in China, supply them. Give you an example. To take 1,000 gallons of gasoline to the Allies in China, it would take 1,000 gallons of gasoline to get us there and 1,000 gallons to get back. It was also known as the flying coffin because they would crash. Not because of pilot error or anything, but because you're going over the Himalayas, jet stream, ice, bad conditions, and the planes would get lost as well. Weather would change, of course. So they said at one time you could actually count the wreckage of aircraft all the way there and back. The disadvantage as a paratrooper plane versus the DC-3 is it's slower and it had wet wings, which means if a bullet comes through the wing on a DC-3, it would self-seal. This plane didn't have self-sealing fuel tanks, so the plane would fill up with, the wings would fill up with fuel. Last airdrop of World War II, Operation Varsity over Germany, the 101st and 82nd Airborne went up, and they said afterwards, we'd never do a drop in this plane again. It was slower, and it didn't have the self-sealing fuel tanks. And the German anti-aircraft had a field day with them. This particular one, we acquired it last year. We were told you either buy it or it gets scrapped, which is a sad story, so we bought it. The engine's out for rebuild. The other engine's there to stop it running away if there's a hurricane. It's ballast effectively, but it's the wrong engine, so we'll swap it. We flew that in here. Ground crew looked at it and had a lot of leaks, and they said, it ain't gonna fly until we get it fixed. But that was down in North Carolina. That's where I came up from. So we hope to get that flying probably within the next 18 months. So yeah. And what you can't see under the nose canopy, of course, is little images of camels. And the camel was a sticker they put on the side so you went over the hump, basically over the Himalayas. All right, so we'll come on in. Yeah, 4,000, nearly 5,000 feet. All right, we go in. There's a staircase to your left. Just go to the top of the stairs and to the front, and we'll go into the main control room. No, Nick, just down there, sorry. Just down the alley a bit, and you'll see it on your left, and just straight up, and then straight to the front of the building. All right, so this is how it was set up for the Royal Air Force. They built this base first. It was for light bombers from 1939 to 1942. This was actually the first base the US took over from the British when the US got into the war. So the Royal Air Force, that's how it looked in 1940, right there. The curtains are here for blackout. The British did nighttime bombing. They did daylight bombing at the beginning of the war, but their losses were so much they changed the night, as did the Germans. So all the operations were at nighttime. So as you can imagine, there's no light. We put the curtains up to block out any electrical light going out. We would use red light so we don't lose night vision. The RAF also didn't believe in using wireless or radios to communicate around the base. Why? Because we're 20 miles away from the Germans, and they would listen. And we don't want to say, hey, we're launching 1,000 bombers, and we're going to be circling over this place and ready to go on the mission. They thought about that before the war started, so everything was done with landlines through telephones. If I want to talk to another base, I dial the number and I get it, and I talk on a landline. It's not that they didn't believe in radios, they just didn't trust people listening. You'll notice two clocks. One is the mission time, the other one's the base time. It would be a 14-hour round trip to Berlin and back in a bomber. That's a long time to be flying. But we also had different time zones. So how do we handle aircraft takeoff and landing? So more important thing, we've all flown, correct? We come into Atlanta, bright lights, it's like Christmas if you fly into any airfield, and we have radar. No radar, no display. So how do we stack the aircraft when they're coming back from a 1,000 aircraft mission? Landing control board, and you can see it right there behind the man sitting. So the planes are coming back. They communicate to us, we're coming back from the mission. First thing we do is we coordinate their barometer in their aircraft for their altitude and ours. So we will give them the QFE code, which is the pressure of the airfield. So that bomber's coming in, he's got to make sure his altimeter reads the same as my altimeter. Because if his altimeter's out by 500 feet, and I tell him to stack at 4,000, and he reads 3,500, he's going to bang into another aircraft. So we have to coordinate that first. And we use a code letter so the Germans listening in don't know what we're talking about. So we come in, he's up there 4,000 feet. As soon as I start landing aircraft, he moves down the chart. We do that today, we call it radar. So nowadays, if you ever look at air traffic controller, they're looking, they say, oh, I moved to 4,000 feet or 15,000 feet. Once they landed, it's all done manually. Taking off, oh, sorry, I'll have to talk about one thing before that. So we're landing, we're on a grass field here, they were on grass fields there. The Germans are 20 miles away. So they would run night fighters. Let's give you an idea. Here's a map of Europe. Here's England. This particular base was up here. This is 20 miles. All this is under German occupation. So for them to fly night fighters over the coast is really easy. So they'd be flying at night, looking for a weak bomber coming in, or somebody turns his lights on so they could drop a bomb. So in the ground floor of this building, you'll see a room exactly the same as this, is where flare men lived. And their job was to go out onto the runway and light torches like this. That's how bright it is. It's a candle. Those of us a certain age remember the little cannonballs on the road construction with a flame? That's your runway lights. That's as bright as it gets. It's a wax candle. The plane lands, or the squadron is finished coming in, you turn it off, and the airfield disappears. Takeoff was done manually as well. There'd be a trailer at the end of the runway. I would phone it. A bomber would back up over there. I'd phone the trailer, tell him I were ready to start doing a bombing mission. He would say very much. I would then flash with a light to the bomber pilot, and the bomber pilot would run along and take off, one at a time. And you think we're taking 1,000 bombers up to high altitude, organizing them without radar, and then sending them across as a fleet. The RAF was unique on their 4 bomber engine aircraft. We've seen B-17s in movies, and there's always 2 pilots with the guys crumpling the hat. RAF only had 1 pilot on the Lancaster bomber. Why? Because the RAF had made a decision. If a bomber goes down, I lose 2 pilots. If I only have 1 pilot, I only lose 1. So the flight engineer who managed the 4 engines was trained the basics of flying, so he would come back in if the pilot had been killed or wounded and attempt to land the aircraft. Pilots are valuable. Let's see. Color scheme. I know everybody wants a color chip in this room. Dark green, most common paint. Tanks, armored vehicles, green, so we have a lot of color. The yellow is because we all smoke, and nicotine stains white. So as you can see, so if you're chain smoking here, you don't have to worry about keep scraping the walls. And the capping on it is there to protect it from when you move furniture and equipment in.
How do they use the speech to the pilot?
Sorry?
How do they speak to the pilot?
Pilot, they would have a single line talking to the pilot, and he would have a code as well, RT call sign. So let's pretend I'm a German pilot who speaks pretty good English. And I pretend to be a British pilot. So I say, oh, I'm coming in, I got mechanical problems, turn on the landing lights. And the first thing they ask is, what is your RT call sign? Alpha, Alpha, Bravo? Good guess, wrong, click. So that's what they do. But they would communicate to the ground, and they would have a code basically saying who you are, and they would challenge it. We do it electronically nowadays with IFF, identify friend and foe. But back then, that's how they would do it. But most of anything on the ground, especially when taking off, you don't want to say, hey, we're launching 15 bombers from RAF Cox Hill heading to Berlin or something like that, because then somebody's listening. Okay. Loose lips sink ships. Yeah. All right, so one thing I'll point out is the rockets. So a plane, if something crashes on the runway, you'll shoot a rocket off. The other thing is used for weather as well. How high is the cloud base? If it's 50 feet, I'll fire a rocket, it goes off, I see it at 50 feet. 100 feet, it disappears into the cloud. So I know the cloud base. Weather is done at each base, and that's how, and we'll talk about that going downstairs.
it's coming back though.
No, somebody's got, well, yeah, there's one for a church.